a waste. Oh, now we're streaming live. That's all they need to hear.
I've done it. Thank you. I'm going to do actually before I mute myself. Okay. Welcome, everybody. Not sure why we're a slightly smaller group this week, but hopefully everyone's just going to watch the live. So by way of introduction, all the Seder's a stage. Well, famous Shakespeare, all the world's a stage and all the men and women merely players. But what I would say is all the Seder's a stage and all the Seder plate merely theatrical props to better transmit the script. What do I mean by that? The entire purpose of the Seder, and we're all gearing up for this, but the entire purpose of the Seder is to retell the story of the Exodus, but not just to tell it as a story, but to actually feel as though we experienced it personally. And that's a really tough one because we're so removed generationally and experientially. So we have to find ways to make it relevant, relatable, and real. And this is where Rachel and Mark and Rachel come in. We await your wisdom, but by way of introduction, Mark and Rachel are pretty much our dream team here in Barnet. They are the super duo of the shul community. And I often joke that they form, the central part of the Barnet mafia because they have their tentacles everywhere, including their family ties. So I hope that's okay to say. And I can't even guess how many of our B'nai Mitzvah, Bar Mitzvah boys and Bat Mitzvah girls have been prepped for their big day by you two. Little bit of history, and at any point just jump in and correct me if I have anything wrong. Mark and Rachel both have a history in formal and informal Jewish education and youth work. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you guys were the first ever youth directors appointed by the United Synagogue, I think.
You're almost right.
You get half a point for
almost,
that.
Okay. Where did I go wrong?
What?
You were, it was before you were the dream duo. Sorry.
We worked together, but he worked for me.
Well, so 1 second. So that is true in Southgate, but also before that, I was actually a part-time youth worker here in Barnet, and I actually was the first Barnet youth worker before youth directors were a thing. And in fact, when I had to explain to my prospective in-laws that we were going to get married, I had a job offer, but we would have to get married in order for me to take this job offer. My esteemed mother-in-law to be voiced the immortal words, "Am I to assume that this permanent job is not a million miles away from Barnet?" Which means I was able to say, well, it's not a million miles away. But for those who don't know, it was actually in Minsk in Belarus. So
like 4,000 miles away.
Yes.
Or whatever.
So that was fun for me, not for them. So yes. But continue because you're mostly right.
Yeah.
So,
but we didn't have Zoom there, so it might as well have been a million miles away.
Exactly right.
Where was I? So first youth director, which is quite something. Mark, you work in ethics and compliance and you are a sought after speaker and educator. Rachel, you are a multi-award winning stand-up comedian, playwright and director, and the only practicing Orthodox Jewish woman on the UK circuit, which is really something to have you this evening with us. So thank you. So I'm going to hand over now. If I have left anything out of an introduction, please put yourselves in context and carry on from there.
It's not something to have us. We live across the road and all my work's been cancelled because of the pandemic. So really, it's just a pleasure to
I had to really
anyone.
fight to bring you in tonight. I fought and I brought you in. And
this is like for my mental health. But we've been, over the years, we've tried very hard to make our Seder nights fun and super experiential. And that's partly because our growing up Sedarim weren't like that. So my family Seder vibe was rattle through it in a stroppy, slightly Ashkenazi, Polish accent, mainly in Hebrew. And then occasionally, and I think it was the same in your house, occasionally the kids have learned a song in school, just let them sing their song. So it was sort of like, it was nice to be with your family and Afikoman and all that was all fun. And the rest of it was like, let's just get through this and get it done. And that I thought when my parents became religious, when I was sort of a young teen, that would change because they were more into it, but it didn't. It just meant there were more commentaries. My dad was a lot stricter on how much he ate of all the different matzahs and different things, and everything was a lot more pernickety. So it didn't kind of increase the entertainment or joy factor. So when we got married, we had our oldest and first child in a respectably fast fashion, and we decided that we didn't ever want to do our Seder like that when we had it in our house. We wanted it to always be focused on everyone having an experience, whatever that might be. And over the years, it's taken lots of different forms. So what we've done is we've tried to put together through the course of a Seder night, or really the run up to Seder night, the sort of stuff we might do, and their suggestions and ideas, and we're happy to take questions, and we're happy to be interrupted, or for people to make better suggestions, which is very helpful. I have got a pen and paper, so I can also steal from you, which is fabulous.
This is good. And before we, and just my Sedarim growing up were pretty much the same, but it was like 25, 30 people in the Jewish Through Lounge every time, and most of the relatives just chatting amongst themselves, making fun. 2 or 3 non-Jewish relatives actually asking interesting questions that they would sometimes get interesting answers to if anybody could be bothered. So that was always a big feature for me, actually. It was like, oh, that is interesting that they're interested and they're actually asking the questions that everybody else has grown up with, is bored with this now, which is a terrible shame.
I think something a lot of people might not know about us is that Mark was the first one of all his cousins to marry in. So over the years, like since then, he like set a trend. The rest of them pretty much all have. And my family is kind of quite diverse as well. And also, since we set up home and my career changed and whatever to work in theatre, darling, we always opened our home for Pesach to anyone who wanted to come to a Seder. So I'm not 100% sure that, apart from last year when it was locked down, it was just the 4 of us, I'm not sure we'd ever had a Seder where everybody was Jewish, or certainly that everybody was in any way religiously engaged. I don't think that's happened in all the years we've been making them. So we're quite used to trying to find a way of making it interesting for whoever is there, and not like fitting everyone in that box of it has to be exactly like we did it in our model Seder when we were kids, or exactly how I put it. I feel like we've waffled on way too long about that. So if it gets boring, just like do a
Right, but I wanted to ask a question before we kind of spout forth and give you of our Google Sheets. I wanted to ask you if there are any particular Sedarim that you remember attending at any age that you particularly remember. Let's start with remember any aspect positively. But I'm interested
it doesn't have
to be positive. Okay, but I'm interested to know why you think you remember that bit particularly, because this is all about creating meaningful, memorable experiences. And when I say meaningful, it doesn't have to be always deep and meaningful, but it, something that they'll remember. And we joke often about the word Passover, but actually everything we do with all of our family members of whatever age and our friends and our colleagues, whatever, we are constantly passing over. Right? We are transmitting constantly. If you're talking about a family unit and parents and kids, everything you do is about passing this culture over all the time. And yeah, we have this one night when we're absolutely, or 2 here, when we're really, really, really focused on it. But actually, it's what we are trying to do at lots of times during the year, sometimes more than others, sometimes we're more conscious of it. But this is just a very much more focused point where we're saying to, if we're talking about parents and kids, you're saying to them, for whatever reason, this is meaningful to me and I want you to have a meaningful experience. I want you to feel like this is special. It doesn't have to be done and boring. It doesn't have to be that, we're all sitting there concentrating and feeling like something terrible happened. But that you feel like this is something that when you are older, you at least take away the sense that this is something you should carry on doing, because they hopefully, and this is one of the real tests is, do they carry on doing it and do they feel they need to pass that on themselves? And so they often talk about grandchildren being the real test, because if the children have passed it on to the grandchildren, then you've done your job on this particular subject.
No pressure.
No pressure. But it's worth kind of considering that this is just a more focused version of something you might be trying to do in microcosms.
So do we have a volunteer who would like to say like a meaningful thing or a thing they remember from their Seder? Go for it. Unmute yourself if you have one.
My mum always says V'dayenu, and we've always passed it down. My brother and I always take the mickey out of that, and now my kids do it as well.
That's funny you say that, because once we were in the fair on Chol HaMoed, like the middle of Pesach, we went to the fair with Naomi Rosenhead, who you all know, who's Mark's sister. She took Zachariah, who's our oldest, who was like a little kid at the time. She took him on the merry-go-round, and every time they passed us and they waved, they shouted Bar Pesach, like from that really boring song. I mean, very deep and meaningful song. That's halfway through. And now, whenever we do that bit now, we kind of just rush through it, and then everyone shouts Bar Pesach and waves, because that's what they do. So it's nice how those things start. Great start, thank you. Is it Leah? Yes. Okay. Someone else? Any kind of memorable thing from your Seder? Okay, we'll have to help you create.
I can see the Liebermans are kind of fighting between themselves. Which one's not gonna share an anecdote? And I don't want to jump in and cut them off, so I'm gonna let them go first, and then I'll share mine.
Go on, Liebs.
So my best friend, when he does the impressions, he does the whole pantomime. Nicole, you were there last year. So he does everything, the actions with the song at the end, which I hadn't seen before. Over 30 years, I'd never seen someone go through make it a comedy performance, and the kids absolutely love it.
That's on our list. It is a very good thing to do.
Yeah.
Really fun. Excellent. Yeah, Shoshana, were you going to say something?
Yeah, but I don't know if mine really fits the bill, because I've done a lot of really big Sedarim, and the one that stands out the most, and the one that really that I most connected to, was several years ago, I think just before we left Kingston, and we were running a Seder for, I think, about 100 people one night. So we decided, do you know what? 0 guests the other night, the second Seder, which obviously we're not in Israel. We have the opportunity of having the 2 Seders, and if one goes awfully wrong, then you get the chance to do it again the next night. But I think it was the second night we were doing the communal Seder. So the first night we sat alone, just us 2, and Yiska, our daughter, was just turned 3. So we like rushed her through, well, didn't rush her through, but she drank 4 little cups of grape juice, said the Manishtana, we, talked her through the story, and then she went to bed. And from about 8 p.m. until about 2 a.m., the rabbi and I just sat. We'd pre-planned and printed off a ton of learning materials, and we just sat learning for 6 hours. And it was the most atypical Seder I've ever had, but it's my most memorable and my most intimate and enjoyable Seder ever.
Oh,
but it didn't really involve a child, so I don't know if it doesn't fit the bill.
I mean, I think that we all put a lot of pressure on ourselves over Pesach. I think however strictly people keep it, and people have very much of a sliding scale in terms of what they do and don't do and whatever, I think it can always feel like quite a stress, and it shouldn't really be a stress. I mean, it's we add loads of extra layers to it that are necessary, like we clean out rooms that have never had a crumb cross the threshold, and we're there washing the ceilings of that room. I'm not looking at anyone in particular. When it's
cleaning out the toaster.
Well, yeah, I mean, you need a sparkling toaster for
taking the toothbrush to the grout in the bathroom.
Right. Is that? I mean, that's absolutely, unless it makes you happy, like makes you happy, do it. And also with food, like overcomplicating things, or whatever. We should just do the stuff that makes us happy. We don't have to do 20 cakes. Let's do the cake that our nana made that always made us smile. Like, we don't have to put that pressure. And it's taken me years, by the way, to shed that pressure. And I can tell you that so far we haven't started preparing for Pesach in this house, and it will still be done by the time it happens. It will be fine. But also in terms of the Seder, this isn't about adding to your pressure of stuff to do. It's like the bits that seem fun and interesting to you and are doable, do those, and don't spend like loads of money. Use what you have, because one of the things that's really weird actually is that when we get to the plagues, remind me that I want to say about a thing that's weird about the plagues. I mean, obviously the plagues are weird in and of themselves, but try and use like what you have. And also, if the point of this session is people with young families, you know, you have a resource in your little slaves that you've got in your home. Get them to do as much of this as possible, and we're going to keep telling you stuff to get them to do, because that's what makes it an experience, and you can tell them that they're doing it for religious reasons, so I'm sure they'll be thrilled. So the first thing that we've got on our list is actually planning how you want your Seder to feel, because it's not just, I feel like I'm on one of those interior decorating shows now that for some reason I'm obsessed with. And, you know, you have to think, do you want it to be like a decorated space? Do you want it to be a mellow space? How would you like your lighting? You don't have to have your room how it is the rest of the year. You can get rid of the dining room table and just use cushions on the floor. You can use old sheets and tablecloths and tent the ceiling. It doesn't really matter, but try and think of what kind of vibe you want to create. Think of this as more like, I guess, setting up a Sweet 16 themed party maybe, but something where it has an atmosphere. Get the kids to do it. Get them to make decorations. It keeps them out of the way and busy. And once school is finished, after this lockdown little reprieve of 2 weeks, you'll be very glad to have stuff for them to do. One slight side point, don't use flammable fabrics if it's the same room as where your candles are. This is from experience. So yeah, we did have a little adventure. We often make Seder together with, we're very lucky to got Mark's 2 sisters nearby and then other extended family. And we usually do a mega Seder, like loads of us one night, like the sort you were talking about. And one year, one of us, I'm not going to say who, and it wasn't in this household, so you can all guess, they thought it would be nice if everyone had like these squares of fabric and gold squares of fabric, and wrote something on. They made, I think, a pyramid out of the fabric or whatever. Anyway, I'm just saying it was quite near the candles, and there could have been an exciting outcome, but it was caught just in time. So yeah, avoid flammable materials. And the other thing is that when we're going to that we often divide stuff up in advance. If we're having a Seder, which is more than just like that, it's the 2 of us and a teenager, but when they were younger, or when we had other guests, you know, in the olden days before this, we would we would email people and say, this is the Seder, and this is a bit we'd really like you to look at, and we'd send it in English, in Hebrew if we thought that was the thing they'd be interested in, but we generally send it in English, and we'd say, you can deliver it however you want. So it doesn't have to be word for word what's on this email. It can be, you can make a poem up, you can do a song, you can do it in a different language, you can, whatever it is. The main thing actually with the Seder, because the mitzvah is to experience that feeling of slavery to freedom, is that you can do the whole thing in the language of the majority of the room. You don't have to read a word in Hebrew, like it's not necessary. So if someone is more comfortable, we had someone one year, and actually they grew up, I think, in Mexico. They had a Mexican parent, and they read their bit in Spanish because that was the language they understood, and then they explained it in English and we all listened to it. So it should be what's going to make people interested and comfortable. And well, quick side story, and then Mark can do the next bit, but one of my best friends is a very well-known actor, and he isn't Jewish, but I played a lot of Jewish characters as it happens. He's got a face where he can pass. And he came once for Seder because he said he'd actually been in a film where there was a Seder, but they only did like bits of it. And he was always very curious about it. So he said to us, and he is like one of my absolute closest friends, can he come for Seder? And he came with his partner, and we gave him the bit to read, which is Pesach, Matzah and Maror, the bit about the Pesach offering, the lamb offering, the Matzah and the bitter herbs, like that bit of the story. And when it came to it, he said, oh, I've just been thinking about how I might do it. And you might not remember this, Rachel, but I used to be in the Royal Shakespeare Company. So I was thinking I might do it in my Royal Shakespeare Company voice. So I said, that sounds like fun. And I'll give you an old prayer book. So, you know, most people have like 9 million different Haggadah in their house. And we had like one very old one that was all like thee and thou and old fashioned English. So he took that one and then he read so beautifully, because he I can't do a posh Shakespeare voice, but you can imagine it in your heads. He just, obviously that's his training, this deep timbre of his voice, and it was so stunning that at the end of it we were all sitting like this and no one moved or said anything because we were so engrossed in what he was saying. This non-Jewish Shakespearean actor, and no one moved, and then he whispered to me, is this one of the bits where you're not allowed to talk till you eat the crackers? And I said, no, but why don't you just carry on reading for a bit? Because that was really nice. True story. Anyway.
It is true. I will continue. So research, getting kids to make stuff, but also research stuff. So one of the things we will get to in the middle of the Seder is the meal, but the meal can be just as themed as the room. Do not drive yourselves mad, but you could be making themed food, which on the one hand could be Egyptian lemon chicken, on the other hand could be mashed potato pyramids. It gets a little bit close encounters. Don't build too many. Don't bring bits of garden in through the window and start building it in your lounge. But they can research, you know, what sort of foods you could be making that in some way is connected with. And lots of people, I wrote kids for that one and teenagers for the next one, but actually it just depends who your kids are and what they're into. But for teenagers, I was thinking actually, and sort of not to talk shop, but modern slavery is actually a major issue right now. And every company has to have a written policy about modern slavery. It has to be like publicized on their websites. They have to really spend a lot of money making sure that in no part of their supply chain are they involved in any kind of modern slavery going on. And the ramifications of that, of them finding that out, are massive. And so that's kind of good. The problem is it means that it's a big world problem, that there is a lot of modern slavery going on in this country as much as in any other country, unfortunately. So that might be something they actually want to research and find out about, the fact that this is not just an old story about stuff that used to happen. It is a very, very real thing that they might want to investigate and find out actually humans have not solved this problem yet and they're still doing it to each other. What was I meant to say about that? I don't know.
I was going to say that if your kids get first news, they might know all this, or if they watch news rounds or anything on TV, they might actually know more about that subject than you think, because it does come up in those things in a child-friendly language. Sorry, carry on.
No, did that bit. So yes, so researching stuff online, whether it's for the meal or other things to say about actual modern slavery or something else, so that it might not necessarily be that they're reading something that's already in the text of the traditional Seder, but that there's something that they actually feel is relevant to just, you know, pop up and say, oh, well, I found this. And you can find with them a convenient time in the Seder that suits, which probably means we should talk about, where's the thing about, I don't know where it's gone.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh, there. Okay, so I'll just segue in here and talk about Haggadah, because that's the other place where that is. So Rach mentioned about people having lots of Haggadah, and there's kind of, I guess, two schools of thought about Haggadah. One school is you all have the same one, so like you did at the Model Seder, so you all know what page you're on, you know which line you're on, everybody's with it. And another school of thought is actually you all have a different Haggadah which is suitable for you. And sometimes there are different things and different bits of information or different ideas. And you can just kind of get into the swing of people feeling that they can just, at any particular stage, we're not just rushing on. They can say the thing that they found in their Haggadah, that they can say, oh, I've got a bit here and I've got a bit here. And you don't, obviously you want to make sure things are a bit pacey, depends on the age group that you're working with, depends on their attention span, but you also want to make time for people to say things that they can contribute directly, that isn't just the main text.
I just was remembering that my dad, when my family became religious, used to say on Seder night that for any question we asked him about Pesach or the Pesach story or the Seder, for any question we asked him that he couldn't answer, we would get 10p. And I just wanted to say that in hindsight, as an adult, when I was at Ilford Jewish Primary, which is a school quite a lot like Hillel, and my dad had been learning one-to-one with his rabbonim in the run-up to his religious kind of epiphany, it was quite a losing battle. I don't remember ever any of us getting 10p. So maybe avoid that unless you're 100% sure that your kids are going to know stuff you don't know. And that's better for them. That was rubbish for me. We also, by the way, are having slavery to freedom in that our lives have been completely curtailed over the last year. And now hopefully we're heading into the end of lockdown and everything. So that's quite a simple analogy that the kids are all going to understand, because we've all been through it together, where we haven't been able to just go about our business and do whatever we want. We've had all these restrictions that have been imposed upon us by our government, for positive reasons, you could argue, but I think we're quite lucky in a way that we have that. It's not even a metaphor, it's what we've lived through. There are two things that happen just before Pesach that often a lot of families don't bother with nowadays, or do it really fast, and we think they're really fun and we do them intently. So one is, bless you, Joanne, one is I'm watching all the time, Bedikat Chametz, the searching for bits of chametz. With tradition to do that is with a feather and a candle and a wooden spoon and either a paper plate or a paper bag. I don't know, there's lots of different traditions, but actually it's really fun to make your house all dark. Like we turn off all the lights, all the everything, everyone's turned their phones off, so there's no light anywhere. One of the kids has put the 10 pieces of last few crusts of bread like in the different places, usually by entrances of rooms, so it isn't just going to be horrendous to clear up afterwards. And then even when we were very young, and even when our kids were very young, they did the holding of the candle and the holding of the feather and the sweeping up onto the plate and everything. And one of the jobs before Pesach or the day before Pesach, was for whoever was going to hold the candle to make out of foil a candle holder where the foil was going to cover their whole hand. And that was like part of the construction of it, but obviously it was also health and safety. That was better. So we'd make like to cover your hand with a kind of lip so that the wax would go out and you can make it super fancy. So that's quite a good job to tie someone up with for a little while. And if you put it all onto a paper plate or into a paper bag, then when it comes to the second part of it, which is the burning of chametz, biur chametz, the next morning, then you can just like lift the thing straight on, and you're not like scrabbling around in yet another bag. And with the burning, setting fires is fun. Like there's no point pretending it isn't. It is really fun to make a fire. So we just used to do it on like the garden path, or we've got like a little patio here. And when we had a balcony, we did on the balcony, because you don't have to make a bonfire. You're not going to put a guy on the top of it. You only need like something little. And it is really fun to gather the twigs and put them into like a triangle. And you can compare the shape of instead of calling it like a teepee, we used to call it a teepee for doing twigs. It's coming up to Pesach, so it can be a pyramid. Brilliant. And they get to make a little fire and sit quietly and watch it burn. That's also very good for distraction, and it's not on a screen, it's real life, so that's very exciting. Obviously, do not leave fires unattended, do not leave children unattended, but we can pretend that they are fun. A fire is fun.
Bucket of water next to it, please.
I was in like a big fire, that wasn't fun, but these ones are fun.
Yes.
Next bit.
All right, well, we talked about decorating the space, didn't we?
No, not what stuff we've put on here.
No, okay. So decorating the space, we talked about the room, but not the table. So the table itself.
If it's a table, it could be your floor.
The meal space is or the event space.
The mid space.
The space. We can do a lot of things with it. So we've already got a Seder plate and the matzah and our cups of wine on there, but that leaves a very, very large amount of space. Now you can then have people be building various bits and pieces to have on the table, and they could be random objects that people then talk about at various parts of the meal, or you could actually be creating a whole diorama, a scene down the table. Some people have often done like the splitting of the sea between the two sides of the table, but you could actually have a kind of, you know, one of Rachel's favourite scenes in cinema ever is the scene in Notting Hill when Hugh Grant is walking through Notting Hill Market in the seasons, right? And it all changes all the time. So you could actually have kind of from one end of the table to the other, bits of scene of all the story as it kind of transforms from one scene to another. That might be quite extreme, but it could take some kids days to work on and leave you alone. But that might be very nice to have there, and then you could be pointing at different bits and almost have like a marker or an arrow, and you move it along as you get to different parts of the story or the Seder, whatever you want to do. So that could be quite nice.
Do you want to get the prop? We've got one amazing prop.
So we were going to talk about Seder plate now, yeah.
So I did a show years ago. I was a commissioned children's playwright for a bit, still do it now and then. And I was commissioned by a shul to do a Pesach themed show that the kids, I wrote with the kids. And it was based around the film Jumanji, like a reworking film Jumanji. And instead of a game board, this is perspective, right? It's further back. We had a Seder plate where everything spins. And that's what took them to the different lands, right? So this is like a massive Seder plate. You can see it's like half a person, and it did have a rim that's fallen off, but we also had a giant matzah box the size of Mark that's like died a death now, and all kinds of other props from that show. I'm not suggesting that you have to make anything like this, but I can tell you it was really easy. These are pound shop bowls, right? We bought 2 packs of 4 pound shop bowls that we did split, like a hammer through split pins, you know, like I don't remember, is there another word for them? Do you know what I mean by split pins? And these are fancy split pins because it was going to be used night after night in the show. And not through, this is just cards. It's like, and then someone who was good at art copied that from the internet. So it says Pesach. I mean, it says it the right way round when you're in the room. So this looks difficult. These are just photocopies, like print. These are from the printer, just an egg and charoset and whatever. We stuck them in the bowl. We haven't even stuck them in properly. Look, they're just this one just come off. It's just blue tack. So when you're thinking about how complicated it needs to be, that looks very complicated. It's just a bit of old took. So it's the idea. Dan's very excited I said took because it's of our heritage from Essex. It's the idea might seem what's the word, sophisticated, but the actual creation and delivery does not have to be sophisticated. Our matzah box was just, we gave a group of kids each a piece of a cut up matzah box. We had how many kids? They got a piece of paper and a square of matzah box. They had to copy their bit of the matzah box onto it, and then we put them all together and it fitted together like a jigsaw into a big version. So that's very easy to do. There we go. Just cut up the cardboard and give them paper from your printer.
Leave this behind us as a prop, but I can't prop it anyway.
Just leave that. You've all seen it now. We can shove it to the side. So yeah, there are lots of things that you can do. And if they moan about it, just tell them that's their experience of slavery and it's a very important part of the Seder. Also, you want to talk about the chairs? And then I'll just say the quote.
Chairs is kind of a big deal. When I was growing up, chairs was a big deal. You brought the chair to the Seder that you wanted at the Seder. So if we had chairs in our rooms, at our desks, whatever, the more comfortable ones, then we would bring those down, and you would bring pillows or cushions or a blanket from somewhere, whatever. And you would basically kind of craft your nest for the Seder. But it was like that was the time of year when we did that, and it was a nice I guess that was kind of a nice tradition that we had, right? So there's a tradition to lean to the left, and if you look at those old pictures of Rabbanim in Roman times, they were on the Seder was. They were each on their little chaise longue, and they had their own little Seder plate on a table in front of them. And we don't quite have enough space to do that necessarily, but
they might.
You might. Yes, I don't know what furniture you have.
Chaise longues.
But it's nice to design your own seat,
right?
And have that you've kind of you're able to do that, and you weren't told how you're going to sit and what you're, and you've kind of almost designed your own throne if you're going to be just as kingy and royal as anybody else and not a lowly whatever.
There's also the Seder plate has stuff that has to be on it in terms of our tradition that we're all familiar with, the salt water and the bitter herbs and the shank bone and all of that. But over the years, a lot of people have developed the custom of adding stuff to their Seder plate or next to their Seder plate that they feel also represents things that they want to remember during that meal. So a famous one is to have an orange. I don't know, Shoshana, if you do any of these things, but the apocryphal story.
Seder plate is a bit different. I do a Sephardi Seder plate, so already
So it's basically
a lot of it is different.
Bread and
Rice
rolls and
Lafa.
Yeah. So the apocryphal story is that someone once said to a female Jewish educator that a woman's place in Torah leading, like as in the rabbinate and etc., a woman's place in leading a community and in Torah learning is as pointless as an orange on a Seder plate, or is as redundant as an orange on a Seder plate. So it became a very established custom amongst particularly very feminist women to include an orange on their Seder plate. I mean, we've got a qualified female Jewish educator leading our community, so just goes to show. There are other people who use that to represent people in the community who are marginalized, and in our house we use the orange to represent the women, and we use onions to represent people who are marginalized. For example, LGBTQ people who feel that they're not able to reveal who they really are, who have to hide their layers, not because that's what we put on them, but because of society. So that you can find what's meaningful for you and put it on there in an age appropriate way that you're happy to answer the questions of your children, and you can keep adding things that make sense. One of the things that we did, I can't remember where it goes, so I'm going to say it now. One of the things that we often do is that we ask anyone who's coming to the Seder to bring something that enslaves them here and now. So it might, and we say to them, if it's electric or whatever, bring a picture of it, because otherwise everyone will bring their mobile phone and put it onto the table. But we've had people who bring like what they feel enslaves them at the moment. Your diary, your whatever, your kids are already there. So that's good, that's easy enough. But to bring something to the table that is their slavery, and then we try and get to a point in the Seder where people are so relaxed and feel so connected to themselves and feel so authentic that they're able to remove the object from the table and feel they're released from their slavery, at least for that night. Shoshana, what did you want to say?
So two things. The first is that the rabbi has a custom of always bringing his grandfather's badge and his yellow star and his badge from Buchenwald, and he always puts it on the table, and he has it there as a reminder of actual persecution and slavery and Holocaust, because the Egypt experience was our very first Holocaust, perpetrated against the Jews. So that's one thing that we always have on the table, pride of place next to the Seder plate, and we speak about that. And with my 6-year-old, well, actually she's just turned 7, or she's in between her birthdays, her Hebrew and her Jewish and her secular birthdays. Something that I remember speaking about last year was bullying, having moved schools and being in Israel, where children are just a lot harder and grittier, like they just culturally, and it's amazing because they make very strong adults, but it can also feel, children can feel very bullied, and something that a lot of children will resonate with and be able to relate to is that idea of being bullied, and speaking to her, using that as the analogy seemed to make her understand really what it means to be persecuted.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one tool that we personally used.
It's interesting because you reminded me of something I said to Mark earlier, that a friend of mine years ago tweeted that whatever question you ask about Judaism, like any question about Judaism, there's only one of 3 answers. It's because God said so, it's because it's to make the children ask questions, and it's to remember the Holocaust. Those are only 3 reasons we do anything.
And we get all 3.
I thought that was quite good.
I have to say that it was, for me, that was always a difficult one, because my family is, well, my father converted into Judaism in his 30s, and my mum's family is Sephardi. So we were totally and utterly removed from any European persecution. And the Sephardi persecution that Sephardim have experienced was not really didn't really directly affect my family. So for me, I've always had to grasp around for a sense of persecution. Also, growing up in Australia, like, it's just a good place to live. There isn't that much. I mean, they're racist as anything, but not overtly so. And so for me, I've also had to try to tap into ideas of persecution that I've never actually experienced. So yeah, it's not just about teaching the kids; it's about teaching myself what persecution feels like.
But I think that's true for all of us, because we've all lived different lives, and we're trying to make it meaningful in our own personal way.
I wanted to just, so I don't know what time we're supposed to be finishing, but I just wanted to point out that actually we've been talking about a lot of good stuff, but we haven't even got to starting the Seder. And that's quite meaningful, because actually a lot of this is about the preparation and the thinking through beforehand, because once you're in the space and you've started. And you can think about stuff, but often what will happen is you'll think, I could have done this and I should have done that. And it's true that some of it you might then be able to do second night if you think about it first night. But it's worth thinking about, suspending that time thinking, so that you can prepare, you can get the kids to prepare, you can go do, and you don't actually have to do everything you think of this year as well, right? You can sort of say, okay, well, maybe we'll pick these ideas now and we'll write this down, where we put that list of food that we've put away that we never remember, and then we buy it again and then open the thing and then use it again. And now we've got 3 of them, right? So maybe you'll remember that, or something, or you'll put a reminder on your phone, and that's a more likely way of reminding yourself what that list was, for if you put a calendar invite to look at that list 2 weeks before next Pesach. I don't know.
The phone is refurbished between last Pesach and this Pesach, so it doesn't survive either.
No, but it's worth thinking about the fact that actually that's when you've got a chance to really craft it.
Did you, Kaddish?
Oh, okay. So then if you are going to start the Seder, and we recommend you do.
This will be a bit faster, I think, this bit.
So Kaddish, actually, we have a tradition which is actually from Rachel's family, and I didn't really have very many traditions. So some of the traditions that we now have are stuff that we've created, and some of the stuff that I've borrowed, purloined and adopted from her family. But they have a tradition where everybody who wants to says Kiddush. So yes, the leader of the Seder will say Kiddush, and anybody else who wants to can, as you go around the table, they can say their own Kiddush. And it's kind of interesting, because it gives you a chance to actually say Kiddush and open the Seder in your voice, because there's no obligation to do it, but it allows you to almost be not again reliant on one person who is directing everything, because I don't know if you've noticed, but Pesach is kind of the opposite of that, unless you're counting God. But if we're thinking about Pharaoh, but it's about being able to then have your own voice, and not just be quiet and stum and let everything else carry on, but being able to make your own Kiddush and make your own start and have your presence be as valid as anybody else's.
And just by the way, you make Kiddush 4 times to an extent to do the Seder, and everybody can make their own bracha out loud as many times as we're doing wine-related antics. So that can be quite time consuming when you have a big Seder, but it is really nice. And in our house, it doesn't have to just be the boys, whereas when I was growing up, it kind of did. So yeah, I just wanted to add that.
Okay. But the other thing just to remember, and this is something that a lot of people already do, but the whole thing about pouring wine for yourself, and rather not pouring wine for yourself. So when we're filling the glasses for Kiddush, you don't pour for yourself, you pour for somebody else. So already everybody gets served, and nobody is, it's a very equal situation.
So have you all heard of that somebody else pours your wine? So
is that something everybody already does? Yes, no,
yeah.
Maybe, but it's worth remembering.
So yeah. Oh, about wine, by the way, because wine is got more and more important over the past year for all of us, I think, is you don't have to have power win number 11. This was a thing that I didn't know until like many years after we got married. You can have nice wine. Like you can have whatever wine you want. So just have the wine you like. And if you like power win number 11 because it reminds you of your nana, have that. Great. But you don't have to. Just have any wine. Have a bit of Grige. So that's my recommendation.
You can't always get the wine you want, but if you try some up, never mind. But try it, it's nicer.
If you wine enough, you might.
Yeah, well, that might be right.
Indeed.
Okay.
And then when it comes to, and also obviously Kiddush, it's nice if the person leading the Seder starts it off by reading it in Hebrew, if that's something that matters in your household. But actually remember that everyone can read it in whatever language they want, and your kids can read it in however way they want to do it if you want your kids to do it. So then what happens next is urchatz, where the person leading the Seder washes their hands. And in our house, it was the kids who brought the washing utensils. We didn't get up and go anywhere to wash. It was always that the children would bring a bowl and a towel and a cup for the washing to whoever that was. Not only then, but just skipping ahead for the washing before the meal. Then if there were more kids, then they would be sent with various not buckets, like bowls and cups and towels for the washing to happen around the table. And whoever did that, by the way, was known as the handmaiden. This was before Margaret Atwood wrote her seminal work. And being the handmaiden, when I was growing up, it was just the girls who did that. And the level of resentment I still have over that is like a bitter burning pain stuck in the craw of my throat. And I did on one occasion really lose my temper about it when I was about 16. And if you ask my family what their meaningful memory was of Pesach, I think my cousin, whose face I screamed in, probably remembers that, about the fact he just commented on how he didn't have to be the handmaiden, whatever. Anyway, I'm over it now though, so that's good.
Clearly.
Okay. That's bit yours.
All right. So carapace. Carapace is really interesting for a lot of reasons. Number one, it's the first thing that you get to eat. What? Oh, right. Yeah. So carapace is the first bit you get to eat. It's a bit of vegetable, often parsley, but not necessarily. We dip it in salt water. We make a bracha, borei pri adama, and we eat it. And why do we do that? So partially, so the kids ask questions and there's weird stuff going on. Another one of the reasons that is brought for doing it is that we say in the Seder, in Manish Tana, we say sometimes we dip once, and on Seder night we dip twice. So there are two dippings, and one is the carapace in the salt water, the parsley in the salt water, and then later on we actually don't really do the second dipping so much, but we talk about it like we're dipping the maror in the charoset. And it's talked about in terms of the coming into Egypt and the going out of Egypt. So coming into Egypt, Joseph famously was sold into slavery by his brothers, who killed a goat, dipped his coat of many colors into the goat's blood, brought it to their father, and didn't say anything and just said, "Oh, we found this." Right. And so they didn't lie, and he was supposed to surmise that Joseph is dead. But that dipping of the coat into the blood is what brought us into Egypt, and then the dipping of the hyssop branches into the lamb that was then which was slaughtered and then was eaten on the first Seder night in Egypt. That dipping of the hyssop branches into the blood and then painting on the doorposts before the 10th plague, that's the dipping that took us out of Egypt. So one thing we can do at this point is actually to try and think about the Joseph thing at that point. And maybe everyone's got a multicolored hat or a multicolored article of clothing they bring to the table for that bit, or there's a multicolored bowl or plate that you pass it around on, sing a couple of verses of Joseph and just mention that that's the bit of the story. That's how the Jews became, that's the first Jew that became a slave in Egypt, and everything else followed. Shoshana.
Sorry, I feel like I keep interrupting you. A custom that we have in our house is because it's anything that is bracha ha'adama, vegetable. So we like to find the craziest things that are bracha ha'adama. So a strawberry, watermelon, pineapple, doesn't have to be parsley. In my family, we used to use celery leaf dipped in lemon juice, not in salt water. But sometimes it's fun to just find what's the craziest ha'adama that you can dip.
Yeah, when we're with Mark's family, we have a big plate of crudités, basically, of all different vegetables. And they have a tradition of actually putting dips out, like garlic dip, and what else do we have? Like Mary Rose, you know, like ketchup and mayo and whatever. So once we've done the karpas, we continue dipping ha'adama vegetables into delicious things, and that keeps you surviving until the meal. That's not everybody's custom. I'm quite happy with that custom.
So after we've done karpas, it's yachatz, and it's breaking the middle matzah. And breaking the matzah is interesting because we've got this symbol and of matzah, this bread of affliction, and the first thing we do with it is not even eat it, but break it. So it's there's lots of symbolism there about people being broken, and you know, slavery being something that isn't like something you suddenly wake up, you're a slave, but you become enslaved to things, and then it breaks you at some stage. And the other thing here is that we then are telling the story, but the story is broken up into lots of pieces. So this might well be that this is such a massive story, such a massive event, that it's really hard to take on all this massive idea. But at the point that we break the middle matzah, we're actually about to launch into the story, which is chopped up into lots of little bits. And if people are not really getting the story and not really with it, then chop it up into bits for them too. And you might comment when you break the middle matzah that actually it's okay for people to stop and ask questions so that they can understand this bit before they move on to the next one. So that might be a nice way of kind of segueing into that and make sure people feel comfortable to actually not just be doing stuff and waiting for the next person to do the next bit. But if something's crossing their mind or they didn't understand something, it's okay for us to pause and ask the questions and talk about it before we move on. And it's literally a segment that we can just sit in for a while and then move on to the next.
So the next bit is Magid, which is the reading of the story, or as it was always known in my house, the long bit until dinner. And, you know, and you'll know where that starts because it starts where there's a bend in the book, and then the next bend in the book is where the crumbs are. That's the truth for everybody, I think. And so Magid goes on and tells the story in loads and loads of different ways, but that doesn't mean you can't tell it in different ways that suit you. So we tried to think of some of the ways that we've done it in the past. So we've tried different languages, different voices, different accents. You know, as I said, we had a Royal Shakespeare Company actor. I don't suppose you could all get one, but they are good when you can. You can have use contemporary stories. So you can take like the theme of that chunk and find something that's either more contemporary or maybe even relates to books that your kids enjoy. Because loads of really popular books have storylines that relate to bits of our real life. I know that, for example, I worked with one bat mitzvah girl where we looked at how Rashi would interpret bits of Harry Potter, if that was such a thing. So you can, but there are lots of themes in Harry Potter to do with Pesach, things like slavery and whatever. You've got Dobby, you've got the way people, the different caste system of people between muggles and wizards. I am not really into Harry Potter. I feel like I've traveled down a cul-de-sac now in that example.
Oh, yeah.
If you, I don't know if any of you who've got maybe sort of slightly older children, 11 plus, if they've read any of the Scythe books by Neil Shusterman. He's a Jewish writer, even though the books aren't Jewish. They have so many Jewish ideas in it and also Jewish names of things. So whatever your kids are actually into, like find out what they're interested in and get them to recreate a bit of the Seder. That's the story as told by one of these characters in their experiences. Or songs, like in the Haggadah I use is a proper lefty liberal feministy Haggadah, and it has loads of times it has like a song that you can relate to whatever's happening at that point in time, and you could just sing the song. That's also good. Or anything that conveys that emotion. And another thing that we've done, that particularly when our kids were a bit younger, like primary age, was dump out loads of Lego down the middle of the table, or you could do it down the middle of the floor. If you're very, very particular, put the Lego through the washing machine before Pesach in case they've put food in it. I used to just chuck it in the bath, but only because we were using it actively in the Seder. If they were just going to play with it, I wouldn't have done that. I'd have wiped out the box and then we'd all have ignored it. But if your kids are into Lego, then you could have them stop at different points of the Seder. I think we did it. I remember actually, I think we did this once when Susan and Russell Eisen were with us for that Seder, and they're so creative that really they were the winners of everything. But you just get everyone, you say, right, everyone's got 1 minute to make something that relates to this bit of the story, and then people like grabbing the bits of Lego and whatever, and they're like, this is Moses, this is a grain storage house in Pitom, whatever it might be, whatever you're up to in that bit of the story. There is, I should just warn you, there is one bit that talks about a naked lady. You don't want to stop there and ask people to do Lego unless it's just the grown-ups at the table. I mean, maybe you do, I don't know, that's very judgmental.
I think you've just invented Lego against humanity, but all right, fair enough.
I want to play Lego against humanity now. But all those things are really fun. And you can make it as elaborate as you want, but it's just about taking that story and making it not just the bit of the Seder where you're waiting to get to the meal. You kind of want everyone to forget about the meal because they're having such a brilliant time. That's an unrealistic expectation, but it's nice to say.
And there are some bits which obviously lend themselves to more theatrical styles. So we will call them the four children, because Banim is the plural of children, not just sons, and there are a variety of genders at the table. And so those four children, you can dress up as the four children, and you don't have to dress up wise, wicked, simple, and can't ask as such stereotypical people. It can be an interpretation of why that person is wise. It could be that you choose celebrities that they know to represent those people. That can be fun, and do it in their voices if you like. But that's something that if you've got kids who are a bit more celebrity conscious and not quite into some of the more Jewish aspects, maybe that's something that will interest them to have a go at, because they'll feel like they can contribute. And then obviously when we get to the plagues, you're going to say something about weird, but plagues is interesting. There used to be like on sale, like a bag of plague props with all sorts of stuff. I seem to remember your father throwing a lot of plague props around the table.
And once my brother-in-law, Simon Hayes, who lots of you know, who's the chairman of our shul, brought live locusts.
So that was nice. And we didn't eat them. Even with the hummus and the dip and the whatever. But yeah, no hummus, dips. What was it? I can't marry whatever you called it. Ketchup and mayonnaise. The what's it saying? Plagues.
That they all feel like they're just at our marriage acquaintance session.
Plagues
I thought
is.
you guys were Ashkenazi and don't eat hummus on Pesach.
Yes,
No, I was just thinking. I was just thinking dips. What's dips? Hummus. We wasn't there.
We call it Thousand Island.
Oh yeah,
Thousand Island.
Yeah, it sounds posh.
I was going to say what's weird is there is a weird thing about the plagues, and that might be interesting to chat to the kids about, which is that one of the I don't know if it's a commandment, but one of the ethos in Judaism is that we aren't supposed to revel in the downfall of our enemies, right? We're not supposed to enjoy the schadenfreude of when something bad happens to somebody else, even if that person's done bad things to us. So I find the fact that we sort of fetishize the plagues even in primary school, to make them like fun and to laugh at them when we sing songs about Pharaoh and the frogs and all that. I find that a very weird and dissonant thing in our Jewish culture, because the plagues were torture on the people who were torturing us, but it was the whole country. Not everybody in Egypt could possibly have been somebody who was oppressing a Jew. Like there were people who lived far away or did other jobs, I imagine, and it happened to everyone. So just in terms of if you have maybe sort of 10-plus-year-old kids, that's an interesting conversation to have. Why, when we are not supposed to rejoice in the trauma of other people, are we allowed to make jokes about this one thing? And why are all the songs we learn in primary school, if we go to Jewish primary school, or in Cheder, if we go to Cheder, or whatever it might be, about Pesach, so many of them are laughing at what happened to the Egyptians in the plagues. On the other hand, they did bad stuff to us, so you can weigh that.
It's true. So obviously the plague thing is like right now. So we are suffering through a plague, and what we often get told about the Egyptians, especially during the plague of darkness, is that they could only sit in their homes because they couldn't move anywhere, because the darkness was such that they couldn't walk anywhere because they couldn't see anything, but it was a tangible darkness and they literally couldn't get up. But I was just thinking that actually most of them would probably be trying to hide away from a lot of the stuff that was going on, and they would have been doing exactly what we're doing, which is just sitting in our homes and trying to not be out there wherever the thing is. And the fact that they had to repeatedly do that, you know, we're on lockdown 3, so we've sort of come out and gone in again, and sort of come out and gone in again. And you have to, like Rachel's saying, these people did it like 9 times until they got to the 10th one, and then it was like, oh, what are we going to do?
In Shakespeare's time, the bubonic plague was, I'm trying to remember because I do know the dates. Hang on, I think it's 1603, 1612. I've got it written down. Anyway, what it's about, it was 70 something months that they had their quarantine for the bubonic plague, and they closed all the theatres and all the brothels because they realized it was passed along by close contact. And people often have been saying to performers during this time, Shakespeare wrote Antony and Cleopatra and Macbeth, and another one, like wrote 3 of his major works, King Lear, during that period when everything was closed. So you should be creating work. And I said, but not only were the theatres closed, so were the brothels. He had a lot more time on his hands. That's one of my grown-up jokes about the pandemic for you.
Feel free to decide who's at your table when you want to say that. But actually, it was quite funny what Shoshana said about we did the thing with the little 4 cups and then Yiska went to bed. And it is not a bad idea, depending on the age of the kids that you've got in your house, to just be thinking about, well, we might have a limited period of time to actually do our Seder before they keel over. And then, so what do we pack in there? And then what do we do for ourselves afterwards? And some of these things might sound like, well, they're kids things, but you can do, versions where you actually spend some time, just talking between yourselves and thinking about those things too.
Or you do 2 different Seders, you've got 2 nights. And if your kids can only really start for an hour, you make that hour count, and then the next night is different. And how brilliant is that the next night is different and not just same when they're exhausted. And also, by the way, Shoshana, I just want to tell you that my lifelong ambition is to petition that outside of Israel, where we have to do 2 Seders, 2 Sedarim, that we can do them at either end of Pesach, like one at the beginning, one at the end. I know that doesn't work religiously, but just think how much more enjoyable it would be for everybody. Just a point, side point. Okay. So Rachza, the washing of the hands, we spoke a bit about earlier, and about the idea of getting the kids to pass around the bowls. But another thing that you could do is you could mimic what you do with the pouring of the wine, and have people wash the hands of the person next to them, or hold the bowl and stuff for the person next to them. So it's just a reminder that now this is a room full of equal free people, unless they're the handmaiden. Do you want to do more?
So after Rachza, we're into Motzi Matzah, which we suggest basically, well, this is the first time of eating matzah on Pesach. So it kind of should be a big deal, but by this time we've kind of been focusing on food, the meal, and getting on with it. So maybe just get on with it. But it's interesting that this is the equivalent of Hamotzi followed by Alachilat Matzah. So you're basically saying, okay, it's Yom Tov, so we're making Hamotzi, but we're also focusing on the fact that actually this is matzah, and we have recognized the fact that this is actually not that stuff. So that is worth just focusing on very briefly, because people will probably do damage if you don't give them some food by now.
And when it comes to moral, like Shoshana said, there are loads and loads of different customs for what people use: radishes, lettuce. I think you said celery leaves. No, that was for the parsley. Potatoes.
Lettuce, date, honey.
Right. So you can Google this, like you don't need us to tell you everything, but in our family we always had quite a lot of competition around maror, the horseradish, the bitter herbs, and that can be quite enjoyable, again depending on the age and palate of your children. So in my family, like when my dad's side of the family, one side of the family had horseradish but always in sticks, like cut into matchsticks. One side always had horseradish but grated on a fine grater. And then when my dad became religious, he was told you have to eat certain quantities of each thing. So to fulfill that, he would have lettuce, and he actually had a thing he'd printed out, which was the size of the lettuce that that particular rabbi who'd taught him said was the amount. And he would literally put, like if he had a sheet like this, he would put the lettuce across the sheet, and the same with matzah, the same with everything ate in the Seder, because lettuce was the only way to fulfill it. But then he also wanted the horseradish because that was the taste of his childhood. So then he would have lettuce but with a stick of horseradish in it. And now in our family, we do layers, and then it gets very competitive about who's going to have the most or the strongest amount of horseradish, because the horseradish, like as I say, because the maror doesn't have to be horseradish, it can be a number of different things. Like that's quite a fun thing to do, even though it's bitter. It makes the eating of it special and memorable, and that's part of the point. But then you had something else to say about the bitterness.
So I think for both maror and korech, which is the sandwich making, I think there's some fun things that the kids can prepare as well and think about. For example, for maror, they should be able to come up, what's the horriblest thing that you've ever eaten, right? Because we're all going, this is horrible, this maror, but actually, what is the horriblest thing you've ever eaten? Or I actually wrote down, and I don't suggest this, but what is the horriblest thing that you would eat if the reward was big enough?
Like if you were on I'm a Celebrity.
Right. And so it's all
It was
very
a letter from home.
witchetty grub and whatever. But I don't know where that would go to with your kids, but it might be an idea. But the other thing was actually for korech, when we get to the sandwich making, I was thinking about they can come up with, each person comes up with an idea for a weird but might be nice sandwich filling combination, and each person brings one, and then you vote at the end who's got actually the one that people think was the most outlandish, or the one that people thought was weird but they would actually try. So again, it's just people, and maybe it's people, some of them who can't really aren't thinking that they're going to really be connected to this, but they've created something that they are going to contribute, and they've come up and it's their own, and now it's part of the Seder, and it does make it feel like they had some kind of opportunity to be making something in there.
We did that once as kids, and I made one which was omelette with jam and cucumber, and actually I remember it tasting quite nice. So there you go, it's another gift.
But there you are.
When it comes to Shulchan Orech, that is the meal. And other than maybe it's nice to do themey type foods, like we said earlier, like Egyptian chicken or mashed potato pyramids or whatever it might, I don't know, whatever you might want to cook. It's everyone's just starving by that point. So don't faff during the meal, just let people eat. Seriously, just let them eat. And then we come to the bit of hunting the Afikomen. You wrote this bit, so I'm going to let you say.
I did. So that there's different traditions of who does the planting and the hiding, and who does the searching. And in different households, it's the kids plant it, and then the adults hide it, and then sometimes it's the other way round. So it's always quite a fun bit. Sometimes the kids are a bit knackered by then. Sometimes they've been waiting for this all night and they really want to get the most out of this, and there's a prize coming or a present. But it occurred to me that you can also kind of hide other things around the house for them to find. And it's not just that they're looking for the Afikomen, but there might be some other stuff that you've planted around, and they get extra points for finding this other stuff. That might be themed, might not be, who cares?
Or it's quite common as that kids get a present for delivering the Afikomen at the end of the meal, because you can't finish the meal till you've eaten that bit of the matzah. So once they've stolen it from their dad or their mum or whoever they've stolen it from, they hide it. They're going to barter to win whatever the prize is, so you can carry on. Like, we won't give it back until we get our present. If you really want to keep them awake very, very late, hide their presents and they can have them if they find them. Where are we up to after that?
Right,
yeah,
okay,
Barech. So benching, again, like, if let them do tunes they know or do tunes that you all know, and that's like lovely. But I think benching is a thank you, it's an appreciation for the meal. And if not everybody knows loads of tunes, and everyone knows like 700 actions for the end of benching, then that could be, I think, quite an intimidating moment, especially for people who haven't often been to a who haven't been to a Seder, or haven't been to a Jewish home, or haven't been to a Jewish home for a religious event, or even when we go to like bar mitzvahs, and like we're often put on a table which is quite a mixed group of people. And I think when you see some people are rabbiting through this this prayer after the meal that they clearly have no parrot fashion off by heart, and you don't know it, that can be really intimidating. So I think that it's important to say what that is beforehand. That is just grace, to say thank you, like we appreciate the food we have, we appreciate that we have the bodies that digest that food, we appreciate that we've got a history that's brought us from the past to now, and people can say their appreciation however they want. And so the people who want to bench in a traditional fashion, let them. For people who want to say their thanks in another, I'm not saying it's an appropriate time to thank a different god or whatever that you believe in, but maybe let people show their appreciation the way that matters to them. Yeah, you doing that, man? Huh?
Well, it's the same. So it's very, I mean, again, Hallel is quite similar in terms of the fact that, again, if people know tunes, let them do tunes. They could have prepared some new tunes, some whatever it might be for particular songs. If they're going to be doing Sedarim and being, well, this year not so much, but in other years, if they're going to be in shul as well, then they're going to sing other Hallel tunes. So they might as well sing some fun tunes in the night for those things if they want to come up with some. This is Hallel to the tune of Kylie's whatever, just something that, because it's going to be quite late by then if they're still with you, so get them to do something that's a bit that they've prepped to, that's going to be fun.
Another option which we've done before is, again, like depending on the age or the interest of the kids, is that we've sometimes left things like Hallel till later, so that the people who just really aren't going to follow it or aren't enjoy it, or it's going to be too much for, can finish you finish Seder, they leave, and anyone who feels that they want to say Hallel, they say it after. So we've also done that before, and you can probably do that with quite a few bits through the Seder. So if you have got somebody there who feels strongly about incorporating the prayer parts in a very traditional way, just reciting them and all in Hebrew, and the rest of the table aren't going to necessarily feel part of that, then that's fine. They can do it at the end. That's, you'll finish that bit earlier, so that's where you tack that bit on at the end. And then, of course, like Dan says at the beginning, you then have, I don't remember if it's Dan or Tash, I'm sorry if I got that wrong, but then when you get to all Chad Gadia, which is the goat song and the counting songs, all of that stuff, if everyone's awake and you've survived to this point of the Seder and nobody's killed anybody, then that acting out is the way to go. And I think you can do that in quite an elaborate way with enough preparation. You want people to properly embody the spirit of the dog, the cat. You want them to make a sound, and everyone do the sound. The first time I saw anyone do that was my gap here on kibbutz, where we were all given the option. We were going to have, just our group was going to do Seder together, and everyone was allowed to suggest like one of their family customs that mattered to them, so that you felt like it was that you were a bit connected to your home. And one of my friends said that in her family, Sharon Holbisher actually, in her family they always do this, and she gave the parts out in advance, and she gave costumes, and we had, so like, the angel of death was all in black and had a scythe made out of cardboard. Just go for it, because the truth is, by that time we're all absolutely lost the plot, so the nonsensical nature of that song feels completely normal. We've had 4 glasses of wine, exactly. Some of us have had wine with their meal as well. Why not? It's been a long day. So by that time, singing a song about how much a goat is worth seems an entirely normal thing to do, like a pub song. And the one is Hashem, or there's the English version of that, who knows one. It doesn't have to be in Hebrew, it just has to be fun. And this is going to be my massive top tip. I've really only ever got in my life got 2 top tips, and I'm going to give you both of them. One is not for Pesach, one is for Pesach. My not for Pesach one is this: that if you ever go to Reuben's for a salt beef sandwich, right, they give you loads of salt beef in like 2 smallish bits of bread, but they will give you bread on top of that if they think you might be going to wash your hands before your meal. So if you say to them, can I please have 2 extra pieces of bread, they'll give it to you, and then divide the meat between the 2 sets of sandwich bread. You can put mustard and ketchup, whatever you want, and pickles, like enjoy, go crazy. But then you have like twice the meal. So that is my advice number 1.
And that's a not Pesach.
That's a
tip.
not Pesach advice, but
What gave it away?
Tip. I mean, it's not, in theory, it's even enough for 2 people, but it's more like it's hard to eat a sandwich which is that much meat and that much bread, but 2 sandwiches between the 2 works better. So and also you can take one home with you. So that is like my one. If like on my deathbed they said, what's your advice you'd give future generations? If Reuben's is still open, that's still my advice. But the second one, which is more relevant to this, is that those songs, the last verse contains everything that's in them. So if everybody's tired, just sing the last verse with a lot of enthusiasm. You don't have to build it all up. Honestly, that's like the end of the 12 days of Christmas. That's the fun verse because that's got everything in it. So just like Who Knows 13, like start from Who Knows 13. You still said it all, but you've done it all in about 1 minute. So there's nothing better I think I can tell people for the Seder than that. That's a top tip, right?
It's definitely a top tip. Except then I don't get to watch my mum losing her breath because she does it all in one breath. So
yeah, there's pros and cons.
You got to do work up to it.
So we're at the end of our very copious notes that we made in a Google Doc. But has anyone got any suggestions of their own or any questions for the last few minutes?
Thank you, Rachel and Mark. I was just going to ask, before you went on to the meal, there was the one stage which is always sort of not controversial, but there's the egg and salt water. And I've got one son that absolutely loves egg and one that hates it, it smells. What do you do? Are there any tips for getting around that? My mum always used to she grates it and puts it in salt water, which makes it, I think, a lot more palatable.
So we have
my mother-in-law insists on it being whole and just kind of dumps them all in the middle of the table, and it's really unappetizing.
Great question, Michelle. And here's the answer. Because we have one side of the family who like their egg whole and one side who like it sliced. So what we do is we put it through the slicer, but serve it squished together. So that way you're going to cut it anyway. As long as it's presented whole, the whole people don't care. And as long as it is sliced, the sliced people don't care. Also, it's not a commandment. If you don't like it, don't have it.
Yeah, I was going to add, I think it's a custom. It's a custom to have the egg.
I love it.
Anything on the Seder plate that's going to turn kids or adults even off. You don't have to eat what's on the Seder plate. You're using it, again, as props to tell a story and to make it a whole theatrical experience. But the obligations of Seder night is to drink the wine, to eat the matzah, and to retell the story, which literally, we were slaves in Egypt, and God saved us. If you've done all those 3 things, you're done. A's done, straight to heaven.
That's what we're doing this year when there's no guests. That's what we're doing.
The other thing that
matzah, 2 sentences, done,
finished. Seder light. The other thing that I reminded, something that I knew somebody said reminded me that actually in the preparation, something kids do like doing is pictures, and you could do pictures of each stage of the Seder or particular scenes or whatever. The problem is it's very possible that in the room you don't actually want to stick those on the walls, because actually on the fridge is one thing, but actually blue tacking it to the walls of your lounge or whatever is not great. So I remember that memorably one year, Mim and Sai had the kids do pictures and they stuck them on the windows. So they opened the curtains and they stuck them on the glass of the windows, which is fine, of course. So actually you could get the entire windows covered, which means it doesn't matter that you've got the curtains open now. But get them to do lots of pictures and put them on the windows. And then if there are bits of the Seder that they're depicting, they can go and point to their picture. That's the bit we're doing now. Or do the 15 stages of the Seder, a picture each, and then have a little marker and someone goes and moves it along to the next bits. And that's something that they've, again, it's about them having created something which has become part of what everyone's doing. So they've had a hand in the creation of the whole thing, and it became a meaningful thing suddenly because it was that bit of the Seder and they made that. So don't discount how they might not show it, but don't discount how important that is, that they've actually had a hand in making some part that was a real part of the real Seder, not a kids version, but the one that the adults did as well.
And we missed out, we didn't miss out, but we didn't include two things that we've done. One is it's actually Sephardi custom that when you talk about the slavery and the whipping and the bad treatment of the Egyptians, you hit each other with spring onions to remember the whipping of the taskmasters on the slaves. So that's sometimes quite an enjoyable thing to do. You know, you can whip each other with spring onions. You can cook them later. And the other one is to recreate the splitting of the sea and the passing through the sea by putting 2 buckets of water and everyone walking through them without knocking or spilling them, which is an interesting challenge. And if you have carpets, probably not a good plan, but if you have other flooring, maybe. Has anyone else got anything they would like to share or ask or add, or a better idea? No.
I particularly like the removing the table and just eating on the floor. I think that's amazing, and I think we might use that one. Thank you for that. Otherwise, it's been a longer session this evening, but thank you so much, Mark and Rachel. That was absolutely fascinating. I think we've all got a ton to take away and to try and incorporate in our own Sedarim. I know I certainly have, now that my kids are slightly older and actually appreciating. And well, Yiska definitely going to stay up that little bit later, and I'm like racking my brain about how to engage her in the Seder rather than just give her the 4 cups of grape juice and send her off to bed. So thank you very, very much for that. If anyone would like to contact you after this session, or indeed if anyone is watching it on YouTube live, as people do, is it okay if anyone contacts you?
Yeah, I mean, we're both on the Shul WhatsApp, for example, so we are quite findable. So yeah, contact us if you with questions, or you can email us. I don't know, you can tweet me. But the thing actually that's really important is, don't feel that you have to use a single one of our ideas. They're just jumping off points for your ideas. So when you look at when you're thinking about, oh God, next Friday, next Saturday, what we're going to do, just have a look through whatever your old Haggadah, or Google online an English Haggadah and look at the different bits and think, actually, for that bit, you know what my family would really enjoy if we did it like this or we did it like that. You know, like don't feel that these are definitive anythings. They're not. They're just how we've done it, and then you'll find your way of doing it, and then you can share your ideas back with us, and that'll be good when we have little grandchildren in the future who we need to entertain.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much. I'm going to